Mrs. Mildred Gorton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I grew up facing a grim dock wall in the highway in East London. And although I was lulled to sleep at night by the sound of ships' horns, I had to climb to the third floor of my father's house to see the tops of cranes, and if I wanted to look at the water, I had to walk to Tower Hill Gardens, which was 15-20 minutes away, or to King Edward Memorial Park in Shadwell. And when the docks closed and my neighbours and people in the area lost the jobs on the PLA, hit hard times, it was very sad and bad for people in the district. And obviously, as time went on and the area became derelict, the dock area became derelict, something needed to be done. And what this government decided to do was to take the whole project out of the hands of democratically elected bodies and set up an appointed quango, the LDDC. And if the people of the area were blighted by the closing of the docks, they were blighted a second time by the setting up of the LDDC, because it has brought them no good at all. My honourable friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, has pointed out the failure of the LDDC to provide the desperately needed housing in the area. 75% of the housing they built was for sale, and the housing for rent was luxury housing that local people could not afford. And this government and the LDDC bear a direct responsibility for the election of the BMP, and not just the election of one measly BMP councillor whom we will get rid of, but for the racial antagonisms and hatred that have developed in the area, the racial violence, while desperate people fight for the small amount of resources that are there, the few places that have been built, and not with the blessing of the LDDC. It took years before we were able to build Mast House Terrace because of the delays of the LDDC, and then everybody wanted the few houses that were built when thousands of houses should have been able to be built for affordable rent, because here was a vast area of land that could have solved the chronic housing problems of that area once and for all, and the opportunity was wasted, and what local people still called yuppies moved in while their plight was worse than ever and nobody seemed to care. No jobs resulted. The LDDC policy of property speculation, high land prices, forced out local businesses that employed local people, and now the unemployment rate in Tower Hamlets in the last few months has not gone down, it's gone up again. Local jobs were not created, despite all the money that went in. I believe it's been estimated that every job that was created cost £45,000. What chronic mismanagement, what chronic waste of public money. From 1981 to 92, the LDDC received 1.6 billion grant in aid, in addition to other concessions in the enterprise zone of capital allowances, rates, tax allowances, and so on. There was no trickle-down effect, as they and the government had prophesied, and there was an absence of any development in transport. The whole project of Canary Wharf, when you look at it, was madness. To build this huge edifice of offices, isolated, with no adequate public transport to reach it, and then when they approached transporting to try to remedy the situation, what crazy mismanagement again. The Docklands Highway cost £650 million to construct. The Limehouse Link, the most expensive mile of road that's ever been built anywhere, and despite assurances to the contrary, the Docklands Highway is used for commuter traffic to go through Tower Hamlets, and you only have to go to Tower Hamlets any evening, any weekday evening, to see the traffic jams on the A13 are as bad as ever. Come any evening and see how that money has been wasted. £650 million. Now, it was only £400 million for which the government held up the building of the Jubilee line. For that £400 million to come from private industry, it's still not built, and yet it threw the money away on roads. And in order to build that Limehouse link, it knocked down the St Vincent estate. 500 homes went by the board, and the rehousing of those people is one of the sore points that has caused the trouble that led to the election of the BNP. Yes.
As my honourable friend knows, as a neighbouring MP, I pass through her constituency very frequently, and have noticed that the site occupied by the St Vincent estate is not immediately above this enormous tunnel. Can she tell me whether it was demolished in order originally to provide for that tunnel, and if not, the reasons why those flats, which I think could have been refurbished, as the ones on the other side of the road, were not refurbished, and the area is now a blank site?
My honourable friend asks a very good question, because most local people think that the LDDC picked the route that they did, and the route that destroyed 500 units of public sector housing, because they wanted that land for office development or to sell off for expensive private housing. They could have built the road along the foreshore, or they could have built a tunnel instead of a cut and cover road. They would not then have had to pull down the St Vincent estate. The bottom fell out of the market, and so nobody wanted the office developments or the luxury housing. The land has remained unused, and although I wrote to the LDDC on behalf of local people and said that local people had plans, they would like to see affordable housing, council housing, community centres and so on, the LDDC has no plans to do anything of the kind. It never consults local people, it never does what the local community wants. That is not its way. Now, let's look at some of the things beyond the pantomime of the Jubilee line, where the government and the LDDC have postponed it over and over again. Look at some of the things that local people are really being irritated by. Let's look at the reason why I and the people I represent do not feel we ought to give further powers to the LDDC, because they have not well managed the powers that they have. The project of the Docklands Light Railway being expanded to Lewisham has been on the cards for a very long time. Now, that's going to cause a lot more disturbance of the kind that my honourable friend for Holborn and St Pancras has already described, because local people have literally been made to eat dirt and dust seeps into their houses, noise, pile driving. Do you know what pile driving sounds like night and day? It can drive you mad. They put up with all that for years, and now they're asked to put up with more for the building of the Docklands Light Railway. But they wanted the extension of public transport. They could see benefits, or some of them did, not everybody did. And members of the Millwalk Park users group, and that park is going to be taken over for a long period, and they will lose that amenity during the building of the extension. And other petitioners of the bill spent many, many months preparing evidence for both the House of Commons and the House of Lords Select Committee. Now, the Select Committee assured them and the neighbourhood that Island Garden Station was going to be built underground. I had asked the Minister in this chamber that a community trust fund be set up with £1 million to compensate people for the loss of amenities during the years of building that extension, so that they can then control that trust fund and provide for the community other amenities as a substitute for the football pitch they wouldn't be able to use and all the other things, the park and so on. At the House of Lords Committee, in its wisdom, decided that the primary purpose was to compensate local people by means of capital investment which would enhance the area, rather than by way of handouts, because what I asked were they considered handouts, through community trusts or exceptional compensation payments. And that the new underground Island Garden Station would be proposed as compensation for people in the area. So some people were satisfied that there would be an underground station, that it would be properly staffed, and that the Millwall Park above it would be levelled off and reinstated, and that would improve the area. But after all that work, after all that those petitions, the discussions, we now suddenly hear that the money is not there and Island Garden stations might be deleted entirely. Now, I might tell you that if you think that the Docklands Light Railway is a great amenity for the community, that 25% of islanders do not live within a 25-metre radius of a station at all. And if the Island Garden and Mudshoot stations are not included in the Lewisham extension, another 25% would not have the benefit of that direct line to Lewisham, or vice versa. So that line actually serves businesses. It does not serve the residential area. It's a long walk, and this new proposal to delete Island Gardens and let everybody down after what they considered were serious discussions, that is going to make it all very much worse. A spur line is suggested for Island Gardens and Mudshoot. That's totally rejected by the local community. The trains would be infrequent. That's not what they were promised. That's not what they want. And what everybody is asking is, when are there going to be trains in the evening and on the weekends? They still stop at 9 o'clock. Saturday and Sunday, no trains. You can't go anywhere. You have to wait in the cold for the infrequent buses. So much for LDDC management and LDC promises, and I think my honourable friend from Newham South will agree that it's taken a very long time for the Beckton extension to come into use. We're promised it next month.
It's a year overdue.
A year overdue. So much for the way the LDDC manages things. Access to the water. I spoke to the Docklands Sailing Club today. They tell me that if they want access to the LDDC-owned slipway, each time they use the slipway, they have to obtain permission from the LDDC, and they have to travel to pick up the permit, which is very inconvenient. And when the club has a big event, so that their small car park is not big enough, they have to pay £50 a day for car parking at Arnhem Wharf. Fine if that was a decent car park, but Arnhem Wharf is littered with bollards and has large potholes all over it. Now, what kind of charges are the LDDC going to make to local groups, and this is a charity, for decent car parking? Because that's essential. We had enough trouble when the arena opened and there were no car parks and no toilets. So that's a question I think we have to ask if the LDDC are going to have more powers. Access to the waterfront. Since I've been an MP since 1987, I've raised continuously with the officers of the LDDC the question of access to the waterfront. They once gave me a briefing downstairs with maps and so on, showing me all the areas where there's supposed to be access to the waterfront, because a lot of buildings were only allowed to be put up providing there was public access. And my secretary, who lives on the Isle of Dock, said, "Oh, just a minute, that long bit of waterfront that looks as though you could walk along it, there's a brick wall between the two sections. You can't walk along it, you have to come out and go all along the road. And that bit that looks as though you can walk along it, well, you can only go so far, then you have to come out and scramble through the mud and the dog mess to get to the other part." I remember when the tall ships came along the river, that there was a big fuss. When the local people tried to go and see the tall ships, there were jets of water that shot up and stopped them from entering, and guards that stopped them on land that was definitely down as public open space. Now, I raised this over and over again with them. There was one press release where Michael Pickard was seen doing some bulk cutting to open some space, but that was just symbolic. I asked them to put up signs on every piece of public open space to say, there is public access to this open space, and put down some street furniture, some benches, so that in the hot weather, in an area where there is very little parkland, that people, and it will be worse when Millwall Park and Island Gardens are taken up by the building of the Docklands Light Railway extension, people can sit down by the water, get a breath of fresh air and cool off. But did they do it? No. There are a few signs now, but by and large, nothing has been done. That's a paltry sum of money. They have had millions, billions, and they can't do that little thing for local people. So it seems to me that local people have very little thanks to give to the LDDC and have had very little joy out of their control over the area. And at this time, when we should be considering documents and bills for the running down of the LDDC, for the closing of the LDDC and the handing over of its powers to the elected local authority, it's a strange time to be discussing extending its powers, especially in view of the fact that it's mismanaged everything it's handled so far.
Mr. Nigel Speary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I should